today we're looking at fractions, and we're going to do a really quick introduction on what fractions represent and how they can be positioned correctly on a number line. We're also going to use the terms denominator and numerator and equivalent to describe fractions, and we're also going to learn how to compare fractions as well. So firstly, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at what a fraction is. And a fraction, as you can see, has a top number, which we call a numerator, and we have a bottom number, which we call a denominator. The other thing to notice about a fraction is that the line in between here, between the top and the bottom, so the numerator and the denominator, is called a vinculum, and it represents division. So really, we could say that this fraction here is 4 divided by 9. So the middle line actually represents division. So the other thing that we need to know is that this fraction would be read as 4/9 or 4/9. The next part is to see how we can position fractions on a number line. And there's a few things that we need to know about number lines and fractions. So if I have this number line here, the 0 fraction here could be examples of 0/12 or 0/4 or 0/3, all equal to 0. So anything that has a numerator of 0 equals just 0, and it is the smallest fraction. The next fraction up we can see is half. So this is less than 1. As you can see, here is 1, but here is half. It's halfway between 0 and 1. It's half a fraction. So we call these proper fractions. Anything less than 1 is a proper fraction, and examples of these include 2/4, 1/3, 7/8. And the top number is smaller than the bottom number, and that's because it is less than 1. The next fraction over is 1, so 1 whole. So with these fractions, you'll either see it as obviously a whole number, or as you see in these examples here, you have the exact same numerator and denominator. So 7/7, 2/2, or 4/4. All of these equal to 1. So the top and bottom are the same number. And that's because if you did 7 divided by 7 equals 1. Okay? So a whole fraction can also be written as either 1 or the exact same number on the numerator as well as the denominator. As we go greater to 1, so anything bigger than 1 here, is called an improper fraction. So this is where the top number or the numerator is larger than the bottom number or denominator. So all of these numbers are bigger than 1. And examples of these are 9/8, 14/10, and 5/4. So all of those have a larger numerator than their denominators, and they're all larger than 1. And those all continue for the rest of the number line. A few things that we need to know about creating a number line is that the denominators, so the bottom number, tells us how many times the line is divided into. So if we looked at this example here, we can see that this line here, and if we just look at from 0 to 1, is divided into 1, 2, 3 parts. So we know that this fraction on point A has a denominator of 3 because the denominator tells us how many parts the line is divided into. The numerator, or the top number, tells us the position on the number line. So if I look at point A, I can see that it's 0 and then 1. So the numerator tells us that point A is 1/3. So let's look at point B again. The denominator tells us how many parts the line is divided into, and we know that it's divided into 3 parts. The denominator tells us the position. So if I wanted to go to this point here, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is 4/3. So point B is 4/3. And as you can see, its numerator is larger than its denominator, and that's because it is a number larger than 1, because it is after 1 on the number line. We can also use number lines as well as fraction bars to compare fractions, and this is where we use our comparison signs. So we have this sign here which equals to less than, and we have this sign here that equals to greater than. So let's look at an example which is to compare the fractions 2/3 and 2/5, and we're going to look at 3 different ways to compare them, and we're going to see if they're all accurate, and they should give us all the same answer. So the first one is to use fraction bars. It's important that if you use the fraction bars that you actually draw them so that they line up at the start and the finish. It's the only way to compare them. The denominator has told us how much to divide each of the fraction bars by. So if you look at the top fraction bar, it is divided by 3. So if I had to colour in this particular fraction, it's 2/3. So I'm going to colour in 2 of these bars here. Whereas the second fraction is 2/5. So I'm going to colour in 2 of the 5 bars here. So 1, 2. And now we're going to compare them. So if you have a look, this one lines up here, this one lines up here. So 2/3 takes up more room or colours in more of that space. So it is the larger number. So what we'll do is we'll put 2 dots next to the larger fraction and we'll put 1 dot near the smaller fraction. And now we're just going to join the lines up and we've put in the correct one. So 2/3 is greater than 2/5. Now let's check that by using a number line. So remember, the first thing we've got to do is we're going to divide our line depending on what the denominator says. So the first one is into thirds. So 1 here and 1 there. And as you can see, I have 1 part, 2 part, 3 parts. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to place 2/3 on our number line. So 2/3 here. So 1, 2, 2/3. So that's our position on our number line for 2/3. The next one needs to be divided into 5 parts because the denominator is 5. So we're going to try and do this as even as we possibly can. 1, 2, 3, 4. And as you can see, the lines line up at the start and in the finish just like the bars. And now I'm going to position this fraction on my number line. So 1, 2, so 2/5. And as you can see, 2/3 is further along on the number line, or it's closer to 1. Okay, so which means that is the larger fraction. So again, I'm going to put 2 dots near the largest fraction and 1 dot next to the smaller fraction, and we're going to join up the lines, and then we got the correct symbol. So 2/3 is still greater than 2/5. So you can either use fraction bars or number lines, but really these can be a little bit inaccurate if you've drawn them incorrectly. Okay, the most accurate way is to use equivalent fractions. So here we're going to do equivalent fractions, and that basically means to convert both of these fractions into a value that they have the same denominator. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use our highest common factors. So the first thing that we're going to do is find the highest common multiple between these two numbers, 3 and 5, which are our denominators. So I'm going to write out all my multiples of 3. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and I can keep going, but I'll see if there's any common ones here, and if I need to, I'll continue writing the multiples. So I'm going to do my 5 multiples. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And as you can see, there is already this here. So both of these are my lowest common multiple, and they both occur in both of these numbers here. So to get from 3 to 5, I've got to multiply, 3 to 15, I've got to multiply by 5. And to get from 5 to 15, I've got to multiply by 3. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply that to each of these fractions here. So 2/3, I've got to multiply the top by 5 and the bottom by 5. And for the denominator 5, we're going to multiply both the top by 3 and the bottom by 3. We're now going to rewrite these as our equivalent fractions. So 2 times 5 is 10, 3 times 5 is 15. And let's look at our next fraction. 2 times 3 is 6, and 5 times 3 is 15. Now that they have the exact same denominator, I can compare them a little bit easier. So whichever has the larger numerator is our larger fraction. So I'm going to put 2 dots next to my larger number, 1 dot next to my smaller fraction, and then we're going to join those dots together, and then that tells me that 2/3 is a larger or greater fraction than 2/5. So equivalent fractions is a much more accurate way of doing that. There are some other rules to remember when comparing fractions. If they have the exact same numerator, so if they have the same top number, then the smaller denominator, so the smaller bottom number, is the greater fraction. So again, if they have the same numerator, so as you can see in this example, they both have 2 on the top, then the one with the smaller denominator is actually the greater fraction. And we've seen that already. So 2 over 3 is the larger fraction. Now, the next rule says if they have the same denominator. So in this example, they both have 5 as the denominator, or the bottom number. So if they have the same denominator, then the larger numerator is the greater fraction. So if they have the same denominator, I'm looking for the bigger, smaller number, which is 3. So I'm going to put 2 dots next to that one and 1 dot next to that one. And that says 2/5 is less than 3/5. And the last example here says if they have a different numerator and a different denominator, so they don't have anything in common, we're going to use equivalent fractions. So we're going to go through one more example of those. So the first thing we're going to do is write out some multiples of 3. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, and so on. And then let's write out our 8s. 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, and so on. And as you can see, there's 24 that is similar in both. So to get from 3 to 24, I've got to multiply by 8, and to get from 8 to 24, I've got to multiply by 3. So we're going to apply those back into our original fractions. So remember, 3 means I've got to multiply by 8, so times 8 times 8. And for 8, we're going to multiply by 3. So if we had to rewrite those, so 2 times 8 is 16 over 24, and 3 times 3 is 9 over 24. And if you remember, if they have the same denominator, the fraction with the larger numerator is the larger fraction. So there are a number of ways to compare fractions. The best way is to use equivalent fractions. For that, you will need to write the multiples first. You will then need to apply that to your original fractions, and then carry out that calculation, and then include the sign.